Okay, in my previous video I showed how I fixed some issues with some misfiring on my WE-18C fully automatic airsoft pistol. One of the issues I thought I'd fixed was how it was firing in full auto even when it was set to semi. It worked fine at home, that fix, but as soon as I went out in the field it slipped back to the same problem. It was still firing on full auto. So it looks like my previous fix wasn't a fix, so I've found a different way of fixing it. I think I've found what the root cause is this time. Certainly it seems to be behaving itself now. Let me show you what I found. So previously I thought it was down to this cam here. Now this one gets pushed across when you go to semi and blocks off this channel, so on full auto it's clear. You can quite happily run up and down there without it being an issue, and then when it's on semi that comes in and it catches the trigger bar, pushes the trigger bar up, and I thought it wasn't pushing it down far enough, which was why it wasn't always activating. But actually it turns out that the issue was this trigger bar was jamming against the back here, so that when you pull the trigger back hard that would get jammed against that part of the mechanism. Turn it around, you might see a bit better this way around. When you pull the trigger back hard, that would come back and jam against this part of the mechanism here. And the harder you pull the trigger, the harder that was jammed in. And if you pull the trigger back hard, then that wouldn't go down. You couldn't push it down. And so it would tend to skip on that cam there. There is a little bit of give on this cam, so I think that was enough that it forced its way past the cam and you ended up as though you were on full auto. It just kept bursting. So a light trigger ball was fine. If I had no problem at all with a light trigger ball on semi, did exactly what it was supposed to do. But if you pull back hard, then it jammed against this back bit here. So what I ended up having to do, so I filed down the back of this trigger bar so that when it comes all the way back like that, you can see it's just short of the back part here. So that part there got filed down, and then I had to reshape the top around there to make sure I still had some sort of curve there, otherwise the slide jammed on it as the slide came back. So that did involve taking the gun apart. There's lots of good videos on that elsewhere, but the trigger bar came out. Just filed that down so that when I pulled the trigger all the way back, it wasn't quite touching that side there. And then that means it doesn't matter how hard I pull the trigger back, that's not jamming against the back. So I've got as much pressure as I can put on the trigger bar at the moment, and you can see it's still clear. Okay, it just clears it all the way down. So the thing that's stopping the trigger going back now is actually the mechanism at the front. So there's nothing that's jamming the trigger bar up. So I'd taken the trigger bar out, measured how far it got back, realised there was a couple of mil still spare on there, and then just took it down. To be honest, I probably ended up being a little bit more aggressive than I needed to be. Well, it just about clears it on the drop. And then when I first did it, because I hadn't reshaped this part on the top, then it was actually blocking the slide, so I needed to go back and reshape it. You can see even now it's not perfectly symmetrical, but if I made it perfectly symmetrical, that side it would drop the top down, so I didn't want to do that. So I shaped it until the slide went back, and that's resolved the problem quite nicely. I can pull back as hard as I want on the trigger now, and it still fires in semi, doesn't get jammed up, doesn't drop into auto. So yeah, ignore my previous video. Shims weren't necessary, they've come back out. Just reshape that. Possibly a replacement trigger bar might have sorted it out, but for a quick fix, just a very light file, very light sand on that side until it moves freely. When you got the trigger all the way back, as hard back as you can get it, it should just push down with no resistance. And so what happened before, so we'll pull it all the way back, and if I had a lot of pressure on the trigger, I pushed down at that, this thing just, it wouldn't move. It was rock solid. And so what I guess is in the field when I've got my gloves on, I'm a lot more heavy-handed than I was when I was trying at home. But I have fired this with gloves on now. I fired this pulling back as hard as I can on the trigger, and that's resolved it quite nicely for me. So yeah, ignore my previous video. If you have the same problem, hopefully this will help instead. Alright, thanks. Bye for now.